Hallo Freunde, es ist 10 Uhr ish in Redmond und jetzt ist die Zeit für .NET API Review. Heute, heute haben wir nur zwei Themen. Uh,
Mhm.
the rest are figments of your imagination. Cool. All right. First up, late entry to 9, array record dot total elements count 106644. Come on, Adam, you couldn't get a palindrome? Try harder.
Yeah. So let's continue the discussion of the tradition of discussing a blocking an RBF issue every week at the beginning. To tell the long story short, an RBF format exposes a possibility to represent multiple nulls with a single record. It takes very little of space, literally 5 bytes. And it allows the attackers to send a small payload that represents a very large array. For example, what you can see right here is a serialized jagged array. It takes only 90 bytes to represent it, but when we instantiate it, it's more than 50 gigabytes. And we would like, during the threat model discussion, it turned out that we need an API that is going to allow the users to avoid getting into this trap. They can do that already for single dimensional arrays, for multi-dimensional arrays, because we expose the lengths. But when it comes to jagged arrays, the length property just returns the length of the outermost array. And I would like to propose two solutions. The first one that came to my mind was providing total element count property that is just going to return the number of total T elements stored in the innermost arrays. So for single dimensional, for multi-dimensional, it would be the number of all elements. For jagged arrays, only the elements of the innermost arrays. If you take a look at the API usage, it's quite simple. It returns long, so we don't get and int overflow issues. And when I was discussing this at another chat, it was not clear to everyone what I meant by total element count. Just to give you an example, let's say that we have an array of arrays of strings, and it's just a single array with an array of 3 elements inside. So for some people, the total element count would be 3 because there are just 3 strings in the array in total. But for some, it would be 4 because there are 3 strings in the innermost array and 1 reference to the array inside the jagged array. So an alternative to that would be to expose an API that gives you the total allocated bytes for a given array record once you call get array.
Would this work for like an array of lists or something? Or is there a reason that wouldn't make sense?
No, the format only allows you to expose to describe list arrays and arrays of arrays and multi-dimensional arrays. There is no conception of a list. Like a list is a class record that consists of an array record and of few member fields.
Okay.
Yeah, so to be clear, we're not trying to protect from large payloads, right? We are just trying to protect for compressed large payloads where the attacker only has to do a little bit of work while we have to do a lot of work, right? So if the attacker wants to send us a gigabyte of class records, they can, but they have to send a gigabyte of class records. So that means they have to do a lot of work themselves.
I got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
So then my question is, so you said with all this API, it's hard, but presumably when you look at an array record, you would be able, I mean, with all the API you're proposing, it would still be possible to do the math to figure out that it would take 5 gigabytes, right?
Yes.
It just means that the user has to walk the array record and like multiply the numbers appropriately, right?
Like so currently we don't expose an API to walk over all elements before allocating the array.
Ah, I see. So yeah, the user really has no way of doing it then, right?
Yes, exactly. That's the problem, and this is why it's 9.0 issue.
Right, but
Gotcha.
for a jagged array that's not reported as a jagged array, for a jagged array that's just reported as an array of array, which are different, the outer thing's only going is not going to deep allocate the inner contents, is it?
It's not. It's just going to iterate over all of the information we have, which is available once we finished parsing, and just read the metadata and do the simple math.
No, I don't mean the API. I mean the new API. I mean the current behavior. Like, you'd hit the array record for the outer thing, and it would tell you length is 3, because it just has 3 child arrays, and then nothing's going to go build those arrays yet until you walk their child records, right?
Yes, until you call getArray.
But as soon as you do, presumably it will do the whole thing, right? Because the array that you get back will have instances of the nested arrays already allocated, right?
Exactly.
Jeremy, when you say a jagged array isn't just an array of arrays, is that from the perspective of binary formatter, or what's the...
That's from the perspective that you can... There's an array record type called jagged array, I believe, and then there's an array record type that is just array that can have the type something array, which then has elements, and so the code path has to hit this from 2 different angles.
The binary formatter code. Yeah, that makes sense.
And we need to
Oh,
handle
that's
both
what I mean.
and make
Yeah.
our users.
Yeah, because
secure
you could
for
be
both
like
cases.
just object bracket bracket, and one of your elements could be object bracket 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 bracket, and like, well, that's a semi-jagged array.
I see.
Yeah, is that case going to be covered by this? Is that case a threat path along that you're trying to solve with this? And if so, is this defense going to cover it?
I think it should cover it. I wasn't thinking about it up front of an array of objects that contains multiple objects and some arrays. Yeah, but it should definitely take that into account.
Yeah.
I mean, logically, we only have to handle cases where the format allows you to compress it in the representation, right? So if the format doesn't do that, then we don't need to cover it, right?
But this is just, I don't remember. So if the root, let's just say the root object, you're looking at a thing, it says there's one object, it's an object bracket bracket, and then you're like, how long is it? And it says 3, and you're like, cool, go instantiate it. But the second thing in the array is another array that was just cast as object. Presumably you wanted to know that was actually a really expensive call to get array.
Yeah, I don't know what the representation does when you have an object in the type, but then the instance happened to be an array. Presumably the underlying format will tell you that the instance is an array record, right?
Yeah. In the meantime, I have checked, and the NRBF format gives you a special record, an array of objects, and if this particular array contains other arrays, we don't instantiate them when you call getArray. You will just, let's say it contains like a pointer and an array of strings. That's an object of arrays. Then we will give you an array that contains a single class record and another array record. And you will have to call getArray again.
Yeah.
So if an array is being downcast to object, then it hydrates as array record, not as the array itself.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. So that means we would not have to handle that then, right? Yeah.
But then
Okay.
couldn't we just do the same thing for a jagged array if it instantiates an array of array record?
We could do that, but it would just, yeah, we could do that. But the way why I have done it, I have added the support only for primitive types. So for like 16 selected types supported by NRBF format natively, just to improve the usability. so users don't have to go that deep. But
Okay.
it
Because part of my
makes
question
sense.
was then going to be the total allocated bytes. Is like, how do you even pretend to compute that? And if it's because you only allow the numeric types plus string, then
Yeah.
that's a lot
Then the
easier
math
to.
is not.
Yeah, this is why it would be possible, because at the end of the day, we are never going to instantiate any class other than string. So it could be like a 16 selected primitive types, or string or class record, which is just a reference. So it would be size of int ptr.
And so, what would happen if you called get total allocated bytes on a custom array type?
It would tell you how much memory it would allocate to allocate that array, and that array would store references. So it would be the total element count times
Pointer
size of a
size.
reference.
Yeah, it'd be weird if it told you the total allocated size for a string array, but only told you the array allocated size for an object or for a custom object array.
Mm-hmm. And there is another aspect to exposing get total allocated bytes. So the format has a support for references. If you scroll down a little bit, we can have a jagged array that contains multiple references to the same array. And the way it's implemented when you call get array, it gets instantiated only once, and we are reusing a reference. So in such case, you would not allocate, for example, here 6 gigabytes of bytes. You would just allocate 2 gigabytes. So this could also give the users a false impression. I was thinking about the scenario where the user is performing this check, and then maybe they are serializing it on their own to a disk. They're like, oh, it's less than 2 gigabytes to allocate it. And then they serialize it to disk, and it turns out that it was 50 gigabytes, and they run out of space.
Well, not if they use binary formatter. Why ever leave?
Yes, but we are
yeah.
not recommending to use it, and they
Yeah,
may be.
just kidding.
Yeah, I'm just, or maybe they would be iterating over all elements, and it would just take way more time because the number of elements would be higher. So there is a nuance to that, and it could give people a false impression that they are safe.
So I'm not entirely sure what the false impression is. Like, isn't the case that your original API will pessimistically tell you everything, or are you saying that the proposed API total elements count would also account for the deduplication that binary formatter does?
The total element count would not count for the duplication.
Right. So in that case, they would get a higher number.
Yes.
Rather than that would not be problematic then, right? It just means that potentially they would write less, but it's like if you want to put.
It is problematic, right? So if what would have been a high number before is now a lower number, even though it would still take a lot of bytes to write to disk, like that's a problem. That's kind of what I think, right? So one count, the element count, would give you a high number. The byte count might give you a lower number because it's deduping. But if your serialization method doesn't dedupe, which it probably wouldn't if it's not binary formatter, then the higher non-deduping number was more accurate for your purposes.
I guess we're saying the same thing. Like I thought what Adam was saying is that the alternative design would be better because it would not give the false impression. But what we are saying is that the alternative API would be worse because of the deduplication. It would result in a lower number than what most people would experience when they would just naively write it down. In which case, yeah, I think the original proposed API makes more sense to me. It's also easier to reason about, in my opinion. It's like if you really want to know the total number of bytes, well, it depends on how you want to count it, right?
Yes, and we would need to take a lot of runtime implementation details into account, like
Yeah.
An extra field for object header, method table pointer, an
Exactly.
alignment, because
Yeah, I don't like the allocated thing because it's a lot of maintenance to be correct, and it's a lot of argument if it isn't.
Right.
So we all agree that it's a bad idea. So
Yes.
how about the original proposal?
I think it makes sense to me. I actually like the name too because total elements count should give you pause. Ideally, the IntelliSense will tell you like it's the total number of elements in a multidimensional array or jagged array, and counting all the nested arrays as well. And then that should make it clear why we say total.
Would we call it jagged elements count?
No, because it's both, right? It's both for jagged as well as multidimensional arrays, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Rectangular is will just return the product of lengths. SC will return length sub 0, and jagged has to do work. And the other jagged has to do work.
And it cannot be a recursive work because it could be also a vector of attack. But that's the statement.
That's your problem, not our problem.
Yeah.
Wait, so if it can't be recursive work, what about like the object array of, or like jagged object array where the individual elements contain object arrays? Like that's recursive, right?
You mean a self-reference, like.
Well, not
So-
even necessarily a self-reference, but yeah, where like the object elements themselves could be arrays, right? Like,
Well, I think we heard that if
Doesn't
it gets
matter.
typed as object, it won't count. If the array is typed as object, not object array, but object, it won't count in this count because it's not being hydrated.
That's
right.
right.
So it doesn't have the bomb effect.
It would count as just one because
Yeah.
it's one.
Yeah.
It's one. I'm an array element that you'd have to then walk later.
Yeah.
Got it.
But
But it was a great question because I had to write plenty of tests to ensure we don't get Stack Overflow for.
But if you
similar
have a-
situations.
if you have a int, lots of brackets, like you're gonna have to dive into all of those.
Yes.
I mean, so
But
it
at least
sounds like
it's
it's
bounded.
It sounds like it's recursive, but probably bounded by like 12 because hopefully that's not a legal type.
It is a legal type. And this is why I don't expose a type that would be an array record of array record of array record of array record of.
Yeah, but somebody should just be like, I'm tired of looking. I quit. But I just mean, like, you're going to have to do the work. Whether you do it by pushing things into a queue or recursively doesn't super matter, but
In the
Yeah,
initial
well-
implementation that I have linked here, I'm pushing things to a queue.
Yeah. You basically just move the Stack Overflow to an out-of-memory exception, but yes.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah, but it would be very hard to get out of memory because the
Oh, yeah, I
payload
mean-
would need to be really big.
I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying you're doing a recursion. You just do it in a way where you don't Stack Overflow. You just run out of memory, which changes that quite a bit. So then, are there any objections to the proposal then?
right. So I, in general, would object to a public virtual and say use the template method pattern, but the ArrayRecord type has a protected private constructor, so it's not really an issue. There's
And
no
Jeremy,
place
I'm
this will
totally
throw,
open
right?
To removing the virtual thing and calling an internal virtual method from it.
It doesn't matter. Like the point that the guideline has is it's about when you have an open hierarchy. Your hierarchy is closed, so
Yes,
you
it's
can.
closed.
So whatever the fuck you want to do in the future, you can, because you can just add your own virtuals and change the way your code works. You can't do that with an open hierarchy because people already have code shipped that does the old thing.
Is there any situation where it'll throw?
No?
Okay, that's a.
I mean,
should
it
it-
might throw out a memory exception, but
Yeah. That's a. Should it be something other than a property question?
Sorry, what does it mean to be a closed hierarchy here? I missed that.
closed hierarchy means nobody else outside the assembly can extend it. So basically, all the derived types are maintained by Adam.
Oh, I
So,
see. Because
so that means if anything changes, he can just change the way he's plumbing the code through.
Is that because there's like already internal abstract or something here? Or...
ArrayRecord has a protected private constructor.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, basically you have no public constructors that you could inherit from.
Including no default constructor.
That makes it closed.
Yeah. I paid a lot of detail to make sure that nobody can mess it.
Yep.
Got it.
So then the only other thing is the name itself. On TensorSpan, we called it flattened length, I think. We can decide it's way different than what TensorSpan is representing, but I'm just going with where's our prior art.
I'd be okay with that. I mean, that's logically the same thing.
I'm fine with the flattened length name, especially since there was a question in the chat I had elsewhere, like how null arrays should be counted for. Let's say we have a jagged array, and inside we have two arrays. One is null, another is not null, and the first one has like 3 elements, and the other is null. So flattened length would be 3 because null has like a length of 0. So, and the way I implemented total element count was also that null arrays are simply 0 elements.
And Tanner, since you're the best thing we have as a herald of TensorSpan, do you think that's a good match or a bad match?
I think it's a fine match. It's the concept is just how many total the concept is how many total elements you have, and we called it flattened to clarify that this is the length regardless of multidimensionality or not. The only thing that I really have a question around is this long because the serialization record can have more elements than are possible on the target process? Like, could you have a record that came from a 64-bit process and therefore has more than 2 billion elements, and you're processing on a 32-bit process where the max array length can never be more than 2 billion elements? Or is it restricted to no more than the max of the process?
It's a summation problem. Each individual bracket can be max length, but because it's a bracket, you can have 2 of them that are max length, which adds to more than max length and would overflow the int.
Not on a 32-bit system.
I guess, fine. On a 32-bit system, you would have run out of RAM before you overflowed the thing. But...
Right. So my question was, does this need to be long because we have some weird 32-bit to 64-bit interplay, like between processes or things? Because, or is something like inint sufficient because that accurately represents the limit of the system?
Let me think about it. But what about a case where the 64-bit process sends you plenty of nulls, like 6 billion nulls, and you need to be able to represent that information in the 32-bit process that just read the payload?
Right. So that's what I was asking.
We still need long. We still need long.
That's what I was asking was, is there an interplay between 32 and 64 process consideration, or is this all self-contained within a single process?
It's binary formatter. Don't assume it's contained anywhere.
Yeah, this is entirely about reading cold data.
Yeah, so long is the reason here then.
Yeah. And ideally it would be an unsigned long because it cannot be negative. But
No, like, I mean, unsigned types are tricky sometimes. I mean, we don't use unsigned for like array length either.
I know, and the other properties also return signed integers. So I don't want to open this bag of worms now.
Yeah,
I mean, honestly, like for this case, it would probably be fine because you're not doing math with it. You would just compare, hopefully. But I also would say if you actually exceed long.max value, like, you probably want to reject the payload. I mean,
My
That's
problem
probably.
with unsigned is as soon as you do subtraction, you have
Yeah.
to like think extra hard. And
But
with
that's why
sign,
I
you can
think-
just negative check afterwards.
Yeah, that's why I would say for things like this, it's fine. I think where it really hurts, the WinRT APIs did this thing where their core collection types return an unsigned number for count, which is basically shitty because everybody writes -1 at some point, right? And then that's just the beginning, and then you do actually math with your array bounds, and then terrible things are happening, right? That's kind of the. But in this case, as I said, like I think people don't do math with this, like because you can't use the result of this realistically to do any sort of indexing because you have a flattened structure to deal with, right? So the best you can do is take the number, compare it to some threshold, and then bail, right? In which case, I think unsigned would be fine. It's just that really you're going to accept a payload that is larger than long.max value. What are you doing? I mean, if there's any reasonable threshold, it probably should be that. So I don't know.
Well, it's also essentially impossible to get such a large payload, even on a 64-bit system, because you're going to have overhead of the process, you're going to have overhead of the system itself, the kernel, everything else.
Right.
So, even if you theoretically have 4 gigabytes of RAM on your system, you can't actually allocate all 4 gigabytes of RAM. In the same way on a 64-bit, you can't allocate realistically more than 63 bits of RAM, because there's going to be a page bit that exists there that's going to actually differentiate system versus user space memory. So you always have a limiting factor of essentially max bits -1 as a realistic limit.
You say this until we have long.
At some point, they'll decide if the high half is all ones, that means it's a restricted address.
Yeah, so then I guess we're fine with the type. Flatten long, flatten length, I think makes sense to me. And you cache the result, correct? So if I ask
do.
this 500 times, yeah. Just asking the obvious question.
Yep. All right. Happy?
Happy.
I mean, as happy as you will be when we review a binary formatter API, but yes.
NRBF, binary formatter's dead.
Sure. Semantics.
Why doesn't it think longs? I don't care. Kevin, fix your stuff. Yes, every GitHub problem is Kevin's problem.
So it's Kevin's hub, really?
Kevin's hub.
Fair enough.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rejected. Here's the first fix GitHub before we approve any APIs.
All right. So speaking of Kevin, AsnWriter encode with fallback 75759. So on AsnWriter we have the existing encode methods. One returns an array, one writes to a span. The proposal here is encode into a delegate. So now that we can do func of read-only span, we're proposing it. It came up previously, and we were going to introduce a new delegate type, and Tobe suggested waiting until we could do func of span because that'll come in .NET 8. He was off by a release, and we didn't react fast enough, so we're proposing this for 10.
I completely thought, I mean, maybe I'm off by 1 year. I thought we punted it from 9. Oh, that's cool that it's in now.
Allow ref struct generic constraint?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, we put it in 9.
Yeah, I'm not arguing this. I'm just saying in my head I already punted it. But I think that was still from 8.
Fair enough.
And I haven't, my head hasn't caught up. Is there, we don't have something like the span type for this particular return type position, right? Or argument position, right? Don't we have func
We made
span?
span action to handle string.create. We didn't make any with read-only span, and we didn't make any with
funcs.
With funcs.
Yeah, if we don't have an existing type, then I think that seems fine. If we had one, I would just use that one instead. But yeah.
So func declares both the, or not both because it's any number. So all of the input types as well as the return type it declares as allow ref struct. In the proposal here, we're suggesting tReturn is not allow ref struct, but tstate in the state accepting overload is. And the reason is because if tReturn allows ref struct, then you can return the input span because we can't. There's no syntax to say that it has to be scoped, and we don't want the span to be returned.
Gotcha.
Oh, and Kevin corrected me. Read-only span action is real, but there's not a func variant.
So how do we handle this? Does that mean that when you instantiate a func, you can actually have a delegate that violates type safety then?
Well, a function can accept a span and return a span. There's just no way, without creating a custom delegate type, to say that one of the parameters isn't allowed to be returned.
Yeah, but I'm asking is that always a problem? If you can, isn't that basically disallowing the compiler from tracking the aliasing? Or does the compiler always assume when you instantiate if you call a method that takes a span and returns the span, that it might have given you back the original span unless the parameter says otherwise?
I think it's the latter, but I'm not later language design expert.
Yeah, I don't remember, because I think if you stack alloc and call a function that passing the span as a parameter and it gives a span back, I think the compiler assumes that might be the stack alloc and guards it, or it doesn't, and that's a thing that you can do to bypass that guard, which is bad. But
I think it's safe by default. Like it assumes you can, but
Yeah. I mean, I'm only asking I'm sure that somebody way smarter than me thought about that, but that seems like the way you just described why we don't want to allow certain things sounded like we are trying to implement type checking by hand.
No, this was just policy of we don't want the span to be returned, because it's like with list we could grow when the span gets invalidated. We also don't want somebody to have, if we return the read-only span, I mean technically they could do it in the callback too, but if we return the read-only span, they can turn that into a pointer and start writing back to data. And
Gotcha.
I mean, yes, if we give them the span at all, then they can do that. But just the design of the thing, we didn't want to return the span because of the don't return span reasons. And having the encode function of we'll give you the current span so we don't have to make a copy of the data is, if we let that func also return ref struct, then you can just write the identity function, and now it's returning the span that we didn't want you to return. So that's just a type policy decision. Sorry, the policy that we have on this type, not a type system violation.
So the API proposal is actually then slightly incomplete. The generic constraint is missing, right?
The generic constraint on the second one's there.
Ah, gotcha.
So it's we aren't allowing tReturn to be a ref struct. tReturn
Gotcha.
has to be heapable.
Makes
And
sense.
why can't it be? Couldn't we, instead of using func, declare a delegate that marks the span as in the T state as scoped, so that we could allow both to be ref struct and then allow this to all function as intended?
I mean, we could. That just, I mean, it would mean that we had imperfect data when we got to, Steve's comment from 2 years ago of we should be able to do this with func once we get generic constraints lifted on them. But the scoping rules
Yeah.
are.
I mean, I guess the question is, is that really a available scenario, right? That warrants the overhead of declaring another type just to represent that. And I would venture a guess and say probably not. I mean, if you encode something, are you really encoding it into another abstract?
I mean, there's potentially many cases where you might want to capture the original state of something. I'm not sure about this particular case, but I know there are cases where you may want to capture the original value of the return.
Right.
So if you only want to block one of the things, then
I mean, maybe. I mean, it seems. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying it seems fringe enough that I'd be okay with saying, unless somebody has a scenario.
And if the language does provide, if the language does allow us to provide scoped on, as part of delegate syntax in the future for func, that is, like you might be able to declare func scope t state, then is provided it's not a mod opt or mod rec, we could extend it in the future and then put allow ref struct then
on the return.
Yeah.
Because we need to put it would be scoped here and then allow ref struct here.
But wouldn't there be a breaking change?
Would it? It depends on how the language feature comes in.
Adding scope. Yeah, so adding scoped is generally not a breaking change because you couldn't have returned it. So if because the T return was not allow ref struct, it couldn't be a ref struct, and therefore he couldn't capture. So any ref struct inputs were functionally scoped already.
So then it's just a function of how it's encoded, because if they encode it as a mod rec, then it'd be a fuck.
Then it would be breaking, yes.
Or
but if they do it
like
they do nullable annotations, then
flattened thing,
it would be safe.
Yeah. And if it's a breaking change, we just have to introduce encode 2 of call encode 2 when you need this span thing. Or
I have to say I have a hard time imagining that they would do it with a parameter annotation, because it now means that the actual type of the parameter has no longer the metadata attached to it. So it means if you can pass it around now to other things that don't have those constraints, which seems odd. I mean, the compiler could block that, I guess, but that.
Sorry, I'm trying to catch up.
In a case like this, it's already in that scenario.
Why can't we do allow ref struct on both
generic
parameters?
It's more like a policy, because basically what that would mean is that the person passing in the span could also return you the same span, and we think that's bad.
I see. Even though it might work.
It would work. We just don't want to do it. We're actively blocking it.
Yeah.
Because if T return was allow ref struct, this line of code would be illegal. Which would just be, we should have just added encode to span and not done not done a callback at all. But we did the callback because we want to trap the data, and this allows you to escape the trap.
I see.
I mean, I'm fine with the annotations as they are. As I said, it does seem fringe enough that I'm okay with saying sorry, can't do that.
Yeah, because if we could throw that there somehow, then we would allow ref struct on the return.
Right.
Does the language allow attributes as generic type arguments?
The language does allow attributes on generic.
I know the generic type parameters can, but when you specify arguments,
no, you can do it on arguments as well.
I've never seen that. Oh, you're talking attributes.
Yeah.
I think actually I have seen that.
Because if
Yeah.
that's the case, then I wonder if they would just end up with a syntax like that.
The thing is, I don't think you can do it in this particular location. I think you can only do it when you derive. I could be wrong, but
Yeah, because I know in the declaration you can do, attributes
Yes.
over there, and in fact the syntax highlighter
no, I think you're right.
thinks
you can
it's
only
legal
do
here
it,
and thinks it's not legal here. So
Yeah, you're right. You can only do it in generic
they can do it.
parameters, not generic arguments.
Yeah.
I think IL supports it in arguments as well, but I don't think C# does.
Really?
Yeah, and IL they're almost legal everywhere.
Well, attributes generally aren't legal at like call sites, right? Like it's generally in definitions of like method signatures.
So like I'm just saying, like in IL it's a bit more convoluted because of the way it's. Yeah, like what you think of call sites is very often a signature in IL, and then you can basically put them everywhere again.
Yeah. So Kevin has added in chat. He did do a proof of concept using a custom delegate type to say scoped, and that did what we wanted, but it required adding a new type, and that he, like MO, cannot come up with a case that he would care that T-return was allow ref struct. I was just pointing out that we made that as an intentional decision.
So we can do one or two things, right? So like either the language will support it in the future as a parameter, in which case adding it is hopefully not a breaking change, or it's a mod opt, in which case we can do an overload because the signatures are binary different, or we add another type, in which case we can also trivially add an overload because it's a different type. So
we can't add an overload.
Why not?
Because if we overload a thing that combines to a delegate syntax with one or two parameters, it would say you now have to cast it to either the func type or the type. We'd have to add a new method group. Or make the parameters list incompatible.
Oh, because the scope thing is not actually part of the signature, yeah.
Right, because, if all you wanted, if you were silly and instead of asking what would the encoded length be, you wrote it via the delegate and you did span to span length.
Is that actually true? I kind of thought that you would have to say scoped p arrow.
I mean, if the word scoped made the delegate or made the lambda not bind, then great. But
I mean, you can
we'd
test
have to
this
look
today, right?
time.
I mean, you can do it today, right? You can declare a delegate manually, right? And then how do you bind to that? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I mean, if you can declare a delegate today with scoped, you just can't do it with func, right? So that means we should be able to try out what happens when you try to use that delegate.
I mean, I assume that delegate could use lambda fine. I'm just saying if we overloaded it and we had func and func2 here, then now the lambda syntax doesn't know which func you meant, unless you have to say the keyword scoped. Oh, and then should have just invited Kevin today. If we're entertaining the idea of a custom delegate, it would get rid of the TFM split. Wait, no, it wouldn't. It would let us add the thing down level, but we couldn't put the allows ref struct constraint on. Or can we? It's just only, or we need net9 because that's the only place that func has it. Might be the latter.
Yeah, it would still be net9 for the allow ref struct part of it, but you could still expose it. The other APIs down level, you just wouldn't be able to pass in a custom ref struct for the state or return.
Yeah, is the allows ref struct constraint limited to .NET 9, or is it simply that func before .NET 9 wouldn't have had it?
I believe it's required for .NET 9 because I believe there was some runtime changes in order to allow ref structs in generic parameters.
Gotcha. So the
There's
alternate would
probably
be
a feature flag in runtime
fair enough.
features.
So the alternate would be custom delegate type that itself has a if net 9 or greater gains allows ref struct constraints. If we cared about having the API visible on net standard 2, which I don't care.
You can't overload based on that. I just tried it. So no, you would have to create a new method group for that.
Right, because you could do it if you declared a local binding to the lambda so it knew what type it was, but I think the
Right.
lambda syntax, it'll say, they're both valid. So
That's a source breaker change. I mean, we could probably make it work, but
Right.
I don't know. I don't care enough.
exactly, I doubt it'll ever come up. So I'm happy with the way it is. Just wanted to point out the constraints so we can have the debate.
So what is the current encode method?
Just take the destination. Wait, what's the question?
As an encode.
So we have encode that returns the byte array, and encode that writes to a span and tells you how many bytes it wrote.
I can't find the API. I'm probably looking a long time. Oh, AsnWriter. That's why I can't find it.
And then there's try encode.
Yeah.
I see. So we only have the ability to write into a buffer directly.
Or the array returning one.
Right. And then this one basically is kind of like the string one where you can create your own heapable abstraction by accepting
Right. So like we have
the span.
like we have cases here where we'll have stuff in a writer and we're like, oh, let's go rent an array, write into the rented array, now send that to something else that needs the span, clear the array and return it. And this would be, instead, it would say new X500 distinguished name, we would do writer dot, oh, he has it here. Writer dot encode of the span becomes a new X500 distinguished name. So it replaces the ceremony of rent return with here's the data, deal with it.
So basically the implementation of our encode method would do what is currently above. Basically it would rent a pool, like it would rent an array from the pool, write itself into it, and then pass it to the delegate, and when it's done, return it to the pool. Is that basically it?
No, it'll use, we know where the data is, because the data is already sitting in a buffer, and we'll call private encode a span and pass that into the callback. So
Okay, now I'm very confused. Why can't we return that today?
because we don't want to.
But why would, I mean, what's the problem with returning it?
It's the same problem as with list, etc. Of you call encode as span, you get a span, you touch the object again. Where's your span pointing? What's in it?
I mean, you could already probably
Gotcha.
contrive like really crazy stuff where you like call into AsnWriter in the callback. That might be fun. But yeah, like at least protects you from some obvious
I mean,
issues.
yeah, well, I've already bound the span, so you can push
that makes
other
sense.
things into it. Which
Yeah, then you just open the API even more. It makes sense. It adds a lot of value.
yeah. All right, so I think we are good as proposed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Burn it to the ground. Still funny. I'm on the team for several years, and I still look at span API sometimes, and I'm like, I'm holding it wrong.
All right.
Memory is hard. That's basically the takeaway.
It is. And I believe nothing else was proposed while we were meeting, so despite the fact that there are still 24 things on the screen, we've hit the end of the list.
We did. Tanner, while you're still on the call, like, do you know roughly when we talk about ARM, or is that like way off?
It's probably still like a month off or so because we're still trying to wrap up the rest of .NET 9, still trying to go through the list and everything. I will go in, mass select these and move them off of the list until they're actually ready for review.
That seems like a fine way to do too. Yeah, I mean, I was just mostly curious whether I should pay attention to them, but if the answer is no, then I can also just ignore them. But yeah, mass moving them out is probably not a bad call. Sweet, then I think we're done.
I agree. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for a short meeting. As you can see, we've cleared the main part of the backlog, and we'll be at short until we have a backlog again. So yeah, no meeting on Thursday because we don't need it, and we'll see you next Tuesday, same .NET time, same .NET channel. Auf Wiedersehen.
Sounds like a plan. Bye bye.
Ciao.